Welcome to Best Life Wellness. Hi, I'm Minister Beatrice. It's been a while since I posted a video. Today's scripture is Psalm 66:16. For all you people who worship God, come and let me tell you what He has done for me. And so today I will be telling you what God has done for me by sharing my story. I think it will help you guys to understand why I'm who I am, why I created this channel to help people find their best life. And so the only way to do that is to share my story. It's a very hard thing to do. I tussled and debated if I should do it, but it's something that God told me to do. And what He said was, show them how you got free and then show them how to become fit. So after my intro, my story. So welcome back. So my story starts with my earliest memory. I was about 4 years old. I was born to a teenage mother and father. They both were teenagers. When she had me when she was 16, I was her second child, and my father was about 18 at the time. And so I am going to start with, so that's when I was born, but I'm going to start with my earliest memory, which was when I was 4 years old. And it was of my parents' breakup. There was an argument, and my father told my mother to get out. And so we left the house, her and her four children. She had four children at this time. And we went to my grandmother's house. And I can tell by the conversation that my grandmother really didn't want us there, didn't want my mother there. And so she eventually let us in. And then we left there maybe a few days later, I'm not sure how much time. And we went to a friend of hers house, a friend of my mother's house. And we stayed there for a short while. We witnessed some abuse between my mother's girlfriend and her husband. We witnessed him abusing her. And so then we didn't stay there. And that story ended in tragedy. He eventually had killed her. We didn't witness the murder, but he did kill her. And we ended up back at my grandmother's house. And while at my grandmother's house, my mother met somewhere during that time while she was there, an older guy. He was about 20. And he moved her out of my grandmother's house, and we moved into his mother's house. And so that's where the abuse started in my life. I was about 4, maybe 5. I can't remember. Not older than 5. So this person house that we went to, which was my mother's boyfriend's mother and her mother lived there. So we moved into his mother and grandmother's house. So they both were there, and we were told that we could not stay downstairs. We had to stay on the third floor. I'm assuming it was the third floor and not an attic or something like that. But like I said, I was young, so I don't know. It was just the top floor of the house. And we wasn't allowed to come downstairs. We wasn't allowed to use the bathroom. We wasn't allowed to come into the kitchen to eat. All our meals was brought to us. Um, we had to stay upstairs. We had a bucket for the bathroom to use for the bathroom, and so that's what we used when we had to go to the bathroom. We used the bucket, and so it was hard. We made the best of it. It was 4 of us. We had some fun. We played some games, but the whole time I'm wondering where was my mother. And during this testimony, I don't want anyone to think I had a bad mother. My mother was an amazing woman, and she ended up raising 8 children by herself, and she raised children that became doctors and professionals and worked in the um, medical industry, and just amazing children that she raised. She is an amazing woman. But as a young woman who I found later was abused as a child, and then she met an abuser, which was this older guy. So while on that top level of that house. Um, my mom's boyfriend had a son who was 16 years old, and he would come up and keep us company and play games with us. And he eventually molested me at the age of 4 or 5. Um, is I didn't understand what was happening. He called what he was doing. He said, "We're getting married. This is marrying." That's what he called it. I didn't know what it was, but I know he would entice us, bring candy upstairs. Um, I wanted the candy. I was hungry. I found myself hungry. Um, and so that's when I was first molested. And during that time, we all slept in one bed. There was only one bed for all four of us, and everyone wet the bed except for my older sister. She didn't wet the bed, and we all wet the bed. So it was hot. It was the summertime, and it was maggots in the bed. And not knowing what it was, we were screaming. We never seen them before, and then we were told as our punishment for wetting the bed, we had to sleep in the bed with the maggots. Um, it just was a horrific time in my life. Um, I don't remember going to school. I remember the older woman of the house bringing us food to eat, mostly old donuts. Now, this story may sound familiar if you saw the movie Flowers in the Attic and if you read the book by V.C. Andrews, Flowers in the Attic. When that book and movie came out, I just was like, it was about children living in the attic who was receiving food, but their food was poisoned with arsenic, and there was a lot of incest going on while they were in the attic. So, you know, as an adult, I read the book and saw the movie, but I just thought it was kind of parallel to my life as we were children living in this room where the older lady of the house would bring us stale donuts, and they wasn't laced with arsenic, thank God. And we seen my mom, you know, rarely. We rarely saw her. I'm not sure what was going on in her life, what she was doing. Um, but I know while we were there, she had two children, and me and my sister cared for them as infants. We had one slept in a dresser drawer, one slept in a stroller, and we was changing Pampers and was giving milk to give to them. And so I'm not sure how long we was on that third floor, but that's when the abuse and the neglect and started in my life. Eventually, we moved from there, and we got our own place where we were able to start going to school and kind of like having a family life. And um, so eventually, my mom's boyfriend um, began to molest me. Um, I had to been like 8 or 9 when he started molesting me. And that went on for quite some time. I remember the last day um, that he was going to molest me. So let me just back up a little bit because now I'm getting into my teenage years, which was the last day he tried to molest me. So let me back up just a little bit and say that, while we was living in this house, there was a lot of poverty. We ate every day, but I always felt hungry. Like it was never enough food. Um, we could there was no seconds, there was no snacking. um but I'm sure it was kind of hard at this time. There were 8 children in the house, and my mom was a stay-at-home mom, so it was only one income. And so it was pretty hard. So let me fast forward back to the last day where it was attempted molestation. So this day, everyone was going to camp, to a summer camp, and my mom at this time started going to a school so she can learn how to be a cashier. And so she, went to the school. And this day she was going to the school and everyone was going to camp. And my mom's boyfriend um, told her that he needed me to stay in the house to help clean the house. And I knew why he wanted me to stay in the house. And I just was so angry. And he had said this the night before, that, leave B here so she can help me clean. It was just an excuse. And I barely slept. And so I slept in all these clothes. I must have had like 2 pairs of jeans on, 3 shirts. I just was wanting to make it hard for him. And so the next day came, everybody went to camp. And then he came to my room. And at this point, I was just screaming and telling him no. He came to my room with no clothes on. And then my brother come running up the steps because he knew that's what was going to happen. He knew that was why I was being left in the house. And right after my brother rescued me, or he ran out the room, um, then it all came out. And so I don't want to share how it came out, but it all came out. My mom found out, and they broke up. But meanwhile, I'm, in the house. My mom was working 2 jobs, and I'm next to the oldest out of 8 children. Me, my oldest sibling, is only 10 months apart, and we had a lot of responsibilities: cooking, cleaning, hair, homework, because my mom now has to go to work, and she was working 2 jobs. Um, Around the age of 16, I started rebelling. I was, just tired of all the responsibilities of home, and I was a broken person, just broken from all the abuse, and there was no help for us. No one ever said, if someone touched you, tell. That wasn't a conversation back then. And so now I'm starting to rebel, and I'm starting to stay out all night and just do my own thing. I mean, just, I started smoking pot, started drinking beer, and we didn't grow up in church. We did go to church, for holidays, and we did pray to God. So I knew there was a higher being or someone we was praying to, but I didn't think he cared about me, because if he did, he would have rescued me. Um, Around 15, I did meet my father, but because of all the animosity and pain that I had, I really just shunned that relationship, although he tried to have a relationship with me. So, during this time, around 16, I will tell you about the first time I was getting raped, and because it happened a couple of times in my life. So, me and a friend, I had snuck out, went to a party, and then me and my friend was coming from the party, and then we seen some guys from the neighborhood standing in their doorway, and they said, "Hey," to me and my friend, and then I asked one of them if they had a cigarette, and he said, "Come on in, come get the cigarette." And I went in to get the cigarette, and he closed the door, and my friend just left. She never came to the house, or she just left. And next thing I know, I don't know how many guys was there. I think I fought off the first couple of guys, and then stopped fighting. I don't know how many guys were there, but I know they let me out that morning. And by the time I was let out, I was called a whore. My name was just being dragged through the street. Um, my friend said I went in there willingly, and she said she didn't hear me screaming. And so it was a lot of shame because of that abuse. And I didn't think to tell my mother. I thought it was my fault because I went into the house. I didn't call the police. I just was so so ashamed of myself. I said, why didn't I scream? Why didn't I fight? I blamed myself. And like a lot of women, that's what we do. We blame ourselves. But it's never your fault if you find yourself in that situation. So after that situation, not long after that, I met a guy who I ended up getting pregnant by, and I had a son. And I'm just fast forwarding this testimony. Um, I skipped over the second gang rape for a reason. It gets very emotional to talk about those parts, but there was a second gang rape. Um, I was just so naive and so, so trusting, and just, I'm not sure why I end up in those situations. It's like I had something on my forehead saying "rape me." It started at age 4 and it continued. And so before I met my son's father, I was in. There was a second gang rape, and I don't want to go into the details. Um, in a different neighborhood, not the same guys. But anyway, let me fast forward to when I had my son. So I started dating this guy who's a year older than me, and I got pregnant, and the relationship kind of ended during the pregnancy because he wasn't sure if the baby was his. He kept saying, "I'm not sure if it's mine," and because of other things, I won't get into that. But it did end during the beginning of the pregnancy. Also, my mother was mad at me because I got pregnant, so I was a very depressed 16-year-old. Me and my boyfriend had broken up. My mom was mad and she wasn't speaking to me. And so around the 7th month of my pregnancy, he comes back, the boyfriend, and he wanted to try to make the relationship work. And my feelings for him had changed drastically, but I figured since I had this baby, let's try to see what we can do and make it work. So he was with me during the delivery, and then he graduated and went to college. Went to the Air Force, I'm sorry. He graduated and went to the military, not the Air Force, the Army. Graduated and went into the Army. Please be patient with me because this is not easy to tell this story of mine. But I want you to see the power of God and what he can do in your life. So that's why I'm being vulnerable and sharing this story. So he goes in the military, and while he's in the military, um, me wanting to be grown, I was still in school. I had my son while in the summertime of the 11th grade, and then I went into the 12th grade. And so eventually I moved out of my mother's house and moved into my sister's house because she had moved out. And I moved with her just to get away from all the responsibilities and the rules and stuff and trying to be grown again. So I moved and I met this guy who I didn't know what love bombing was. I had no idea what I know now today, that a narcissist would love bomb you. And so I went through the love bombing. He had the gift of gab. He told me things about myself that no one had ever said to me. He wrote me a poem that I know by heart because I've read it a million times. And he convinced me to break up with the guy in the Army. Like, he don't love you. If he did, he would be there. He would have been there. And so I sent him a Dear John letter. And it wasn't hard for me to do because my love for him has changed because how he dumped me in the beginning of the pregnancy. And I really didn't trust that he would be there for me because of how he left me during a very vulnerable time. So I just sent him a Dear John letter and broke up with him and continued a relationship with this guy who was love bombing me. And he just was, he took me on a date, and I never been on a date. I had a boyfriend who never took me on anywhere. He just took me, he just wanted me for sex. I'm assuming that's what teenagers do. Um, so I ended up marrying this guy who love bombing me. We were the same age. He wasn't an older guy. We was the same age. And then he went into the military. And he got stationed in Germany. And so I did marry him when my son was 1 year old. And when I met him, my son was 3 months old. So I just married him like 9 months later, basically. Um, so we ended up, he went to Germany, and then me and my son went to Germany. And let me just back up just a little because being a young mother, I really did not want to be a mother. Um, I started leaving my son with my sister. This is before I got married and before I moved out of my mother's house. When I first had him, I was 17 years old. I didn't want to be a mother. I just wanted a life of a teenager and a life of fun and happiness. And up to this point, I was so depressed as a child, depressed as a teenager. I'm surprised no one in the school noticed that I was hungry and dirty, depressed. No one noticed. So now let me fast forward to the marriage. I was 18 years old when I married him. We go to Germany, and the love bombing stopped immediately, and the abuse started. Domestic violence. I remember seeing my mom being abused and wondered, how can you let a man hit you like that? I had said to myself, I would never live with a man and allow him to put his hands on me. And so we was in Germany, and we ended up on the economy. So when you're in the military and you have a family, you can stay on base. But he wanted to stay off base and in the civilian community. And I think it was because he wanted to be able to abuse me and I have people around to witness the abuse. And so I was just being abused. I mean, for everything. The food wasn't right. And, and one time he said to me, it's a shame I gotta wake up and see you. He started calling me ugly. He says, it's a shame when I wake up, I got to see you as this ugly person I got to look at. He said, I want you to get up. I want you dressed. I want you hair done before I get up. So I had to get up at about 5 in the morning before I ironed his uniforms and things like that for the military and just be dressed and have my hair done. And he just was so abusive. I mean, he was calling me stupid, dumb, ugly. Um, I just felt so alone. And so now I'm in another country. I didn't have a phone and I didn't have mail. He had all the mail going to a post office box number. And then he would tell me, oh, your mom wrote you 6 weeks ago. So it's total control of my life. I had no family. Coming from a family with a lot of siblings, it was horrific to say the least when I was in Germany. And then I got pregnant, and he was so angry with me for getting pregnant. Of course, I would get pregnant because I'm not taking birth control. I'm not going to a doctor, and even during our sexual encounters, because the last time I was raped by um, my mom's boyfriend, I was 15, and then I got married at 18. It was still fresh, that whole scene was still fresh in my mind. So I would have problems being intimate, and he would, just berate me and just do what he wanted to do anyway, regardless if I wanted to do it. There was no compassion for me at all. So I was pregnant. I got pregnant by him, and I never went to prenatal. He never took me to get any prenatal care. The first time I went to the hospital was because of him being real rough with me during sex, and I started bleeding real bad, started having cramps real bad. I was around 5 months pregnant. I begged him to take me to the hospital because of the blood. He was so angry. I mean, he hit me a couple of times, but he took me to the hospital. And then the doctors asked what was going on. Why is she bleeding like this? What did you do? And the doctor basically told him, don't touch me until after I have the baby. And so we go back, and he abused me again because he got berated by the doctor because the doctor told him not to touch me, and so he abused me. And he still did what he wanted to do. I'm going to fast forward. We was in Germany for about 3 years, and we ended up going to other bases like Savannah, Georgia was one of them. The abuse continued. He had a gambling problem. He was cheating a lot. There was a lot of infidelity, a lot of abuse. Eventually, um, he got out of the military. He was going to reenlist. He asked me, "What do I think?" I said, "I think you should get out because I just wanted my family." And so there was a time when we were stationed before he got out. When we were stationed in Germany, that my mom asked for me to come home to get some money because she had won some money through the lottery, and she wanted me to come home to get some money. And of course, he let me go then to get the money, but he kept my two children and said he figured that I would come back because of the kids. And when I got home, I felt so free. I mean, I didn't want to go back. Um, I just contemplated how I can stay here to, go back later and get my kids. I didn't want to go back, but he tricked me, and I won't get into details how he tricked me to come back, and I came back, and It's just, it was several times I tried to escape that relationship, and somehow he found out. And I mean, sometimes somehow he found out, and I wasn't able to escape. And I'll tell more in a book that I'm planning on writing, but this is just a short version of my story. So he ended up getting out of the military, and we was living in Philadelphia, and um, I was living with my mother at first, and he was living with his mother at first. But then I found out he had a girlfriend that he was really living with and not living with his mother. And eventually, we did get a place together, and that's when the drug addiction started. I was already smoking weed and drinking alcohol and beer, and he was doing something. I wasn't sure what it was. All I know, he got paid. I didn't see him all weekend, and he would come home broke. I didn't know what it was. And he just said, if I can do what I do out there, if I can do it at home, I'll do it at home. I'll stay home more. I said, well, just do it at home then. And so it was crack. And it was in the 80s when the crack epidemic hit most households. And he asked me that I wanted to try it. He introduced me to it. He said it's better. I said, what is it? He said it's better than marijuana. At this point, I didn't care because I just wanted something to numb me. You know, it's just, it was just another drug. I didn't know anything about cocaine. I always thought cocaine was something that only rich people did. So you see it in the movies like Scarface and things like that. But anyway, I tried it, and of course, immediately, like most people, I got hooked. And this was in the early 80s. But during this time, the abuse escalated. I mean, I got kicked out the house. I mean, dragged out the house, barely clothed. I had my hair pulled out of my scalp. I got knocked out cold. I mean, knocked out like unconscious by this man. The abuse got worse. The poverty in the house, the shame that I felt being a mother, and my kids seeing this, my two children seeing this, and I just knew I had to. I couldn't live like this. I didn't want to die like this as an addict. But during this time, I didn't want to live, so I attempted suicide twice. Um, the last time I attempted it, I kind of cursed God because although I knew there was a higher being and that I just knew he controlled life and death, and I just was not understanding why some people attempt suicide and they succeed. And you know, when you're not saved and you think death is an escape, it's really not an escape. It's a trip to eternal pain and suffering. But me not knowing that, um, and God, by His grace and mercy, knew where my life would be, and He spared me those times I tried to commit suicide. But one day, um, I was just so tired of the abuse, so tired of the drugs, and this was about 2 years after I got into the drugs, that I just screamed out to God to help me. Um, Let me backtrack before I get to that part, because right before I screamed out to God to help me, one of the reasons why I did was because I realized the hold that the drug crack had on me. It was so bad that when you have a drug addiction, nothing is more important. Your children, your spouse, food, the utilities, the household, nothing is more important than that drug. That drug controls your every thought. It controls everything, everything. And that's all you want. That's all you want. So this one day we were getting high, and we we ran out of matches. So we started burning the match book. And my daughter, who has asthma, um, started coughing. She was upstairs. I heard her coughing. And then at some point, and I don't know how long, maybe a couple of hours went by, she asked to go to the hospital, and she can barely talk. I mean, she was like, she couldn't get a sentence out. She was like, Mom, trying to get the words out. And I said, okay, baby, okay, I'm going to take you to the hospital. Just go upstairs. And in my insane mind, I thought if she stuck her head out the window, she would get some fresh air to help her breathe. But I just could not leave the drug. I could not leave the drug. It's one of the biggest things that I'm ashamed of. Um, and so she was just begging to go to the hospital. And then time went by, and next thing I know, the sun was coming up, and we had ran out of drugs. Drugs was gone, and the sun was coming up. And my mother knocked on the door. At this point, I'm dressing my daughter to take her to the hospital. I was going to call 911 and go to the hospital in a police car or ambulance. We didn't have a car. So my mom knocks on the door. It was like 6 in the morning. And I was like, Mom, what are you doing here? And she said, what's going on? And I said, I'm about to take my daughter to the hospital. And so my mom took us. And she said, I don't know. I said, well, Mom, why did you come to my house? And she said, I don't know. Something just told me to come to your house. She knew I was, being abused. She didn't know why she was coming, but I just thank God he sent her. And so we get to the hospital. I'm not sure if you understand, know South Philly, but I was living at 33rd and Reed, and we went to Children's Hospital at 34th and Spruce. We go to the hospital, and they put her under these bright lights, and everybody's running around, trying to save her life, which they did. Um, but I saw her under the light, and I saw her hair matted to her head, and her clothes were so dingy, and I just went to the bathroom because I was just so ashamed. And then when I came out the bathroom, they was changing shifts. So one nurse was telling the other nurse about my daughter, and she said, if she make it through the night, she has a chance. And I didn't know how close to death she was, but by her bedside, I asked God, not knowing, I have never mentioned Jesus, 'cause I never knew Jesus. But I just asked God, if you save my daughter, I promise you I will leave drugs alone. If you save my daughter. She ended up in one of those oxygen bag things, and she was in the hospital for about 5 days. And I would walk from 34th and Spruce to 33rd and Reed, um, in Philadelphia, to take care of my son, then walk back to take him to be with my daughter, and back and forth. At this time, her dad never visited her in the hospital during this time. But after 5 days, she was released, and I just was like, that's when I cried out to God to help me get out of this house, out of this situation, out of this abuse, away from this addiction. And I just cried out to him, and he gave me a plan. Now, I have tried several times, and none of my plans ever worked, but God gave me a plan. So during that time, um, when you was on welfare, you would go to this place called the 3-2 Center to pick up your food stamps and your cash check. And so the plan was to that day, and when you're on drugs, the first thing you do when you get your money, you sell your food stamps, and then you go get high with everything you have. And but the Holy Spirit or God, and not knowing who the Holy Spirit was, God spoke to me and told me that plan, and the plan was February the 3rd, 1986, was the day of my escape from that abuse. And so I had about 3 weeks, and the plan was to go. And when you're on crack, you're the first ones in line. I mean, it's still dark outside, and all you see was people on drugs lined up. The place didn't open till about 8 in the morning. We out there 6 o'clock in the morning, and it's still pretty much dark. I laugh now. It wasn't funny then, but I'm not trying to make light of the situation. It's just amazing how that drug has so much power over you. But the plan was to leave on that day, February the 3rd, when I got my next check, to tell my husband that I don't want to get high today. Here's some money, you get high. I'll hold some money so we won't spend it all. And he was like, "You sure?" But before that day came, I was preparing. I was taking clothes. We had one of those basements that had an exit that would take you out into like a drive through, like a driveway, like an alleyway. And so I was taking clothes and putting it in the bag at that back door, preparing. And my son saw me. He said, "Mom, what are you doing? Why you putting my clothes in that bag?" And I said, "We're leaving Daddy." And he was happy, to say the least. I said, "Don't tell your sister. Um, it's our secret. and it's going to be in 3 weeks. And he kept asking me, "Are we still leaving? Are we still leaving?" Because he was tired of the seeing his mom being abused too. So, I meanwhile I had called my mother and you know told her the date I was going to leave. I called my grandmother first, then she advised me to call my mother and told her about me leaving and asked for her help. And the day came. I was so nervous. We went and got the check. I gave him the money. He's like, "Are you sure? Are you sure?" He went to one of his friends' houses. I came back to the house. I called my mom. She pulled up at the back and we left. And we ended up at my mother's house. And he took him days to come looking for me. But anyway, um, he did come, you know, he did come days later, maybe like 3 or 4 days later. And he had crack when he came. Now I'm fresh away from crack. So of course I'm still addicted. And of course I'm still craving it. And he came and he said, "Let's go in your mom's basement." He showed me what he had in his hand, and immediately all I thought about was the drug. I didn't even think about the fact that I got away from this man, that God helped me. I just thought about the drug. So we go into my mom's basement, and so he did the first vial and capsule. What it was back then, it was in this capsule. He did the first capsule, and now I'm anxious. And he was like, "No, be patient. It's your time. Your time is coming." And when he after he did his capsule, he put my capsule in the pipe and it's fizzed right out. I can smell like perfume coming from the pipe. And what it was was ivory soap. So God prevented me from going back to hell, going back down that road. And I just screamed at him to get away, get out. He said, "No, I'll be back." I said, "Do not come back." I was telling people in the house, "Don't let him come in here." And I never went back to crack. Um, it was, I still smoked weed, I still drank, but I was now on my road to recovery. And I did not know what God had in store for me during this time. So, um, during this time, I was, just trying to figure out my life. I wasn't healthy because of all the drugs and not eating proper nutrition. And I did get a job um, at a factory where I had to leave 5 in the morning to go to work, but I had a job. I was happy about that. And then I did meet someone and started a relationship with him. But before I met this person that I had a relationship with, I met another person. When I moved into my mother's house, I was next door to, you know, another family, and I noticed this guy. He was, sitting on the steps combing his children's hair, his daughter's hair, and I asked my sister, "Who's that guy?" And she said he was a divorcee. So me and this divorcee ended up becoming friends. We was hanging out with our children. Our children played together. Um, I was working. I was happy. I wanted a relationship with him, but he didn't seem to want a relationship. We just maintained a friendship. We was very close friends. And then I did meet a guy that I ended up moving in with, and not right away, but over a period of time, I ended up moving in with him and having a relationship with him and having a child by him. And that was not a healthy relationship. There was a lot of infidelity, a lot of, I was so insecure, had such low self esteem. My best friend, he went into the military, and at an age where most guys don't go at that age, but he was still young enough to go in, and he did go in. So I lost contact with him, and then I was in this relationship with this guy, and we lived together, and we had our own place, um, and it was not a good relationship. I mean, it wasn't physical abuse in that relationship. It was a lot of psychological, emotional abuse. It was a lot of cheating, a lot of lying, habitual cheating and lying. And so, my life at this point has been nothing but abuse. I mean, from 4 years old on up, nonstop. And, being in that relationship um, cut my husband away because although he was abusive and he would threaten to come and slash my throat, I think having a boyfriend kind of made him not. And then he ended up going to prison. So I had some relief there when he ended up going to prison. So anyway, at this time, I still wasn't going to church, but there was a teenager in the neighborhood who invited my children to church, my two oldest children, who were 8 and 10 at the time. And so they started going to this church and they started inviting me to this church and for different things. They were singing, and then one time they invited me because they were being baptized. And so they wanted me to be there for their baptism. So, I just was going, hearing the word, seeds were being planted. And so, but I was still partying, still drinking, still smoking weed, still wasn't ready for salvation, which I didn't even know what that was. I know I didn't even visit the church that much, maybe once or twice a year. But my kids was going every Sunday, and I would make them go. I figured I wanted them to have this moral understanding of who God was. But one day, I woke my son up and said, "Get ready for church," and he asked me, "Why is church important for us, but not important for you?" And I just said, do what I say. Don't don't be asking me questions. But every time I got him up every Sunday after that, I would hear that question in my head. But still I wasn't ready. I was still partying, still living in sin, basically. And although I wasn't addicted to cocaine, I was addicted to marijuana. And so, and I worked. I had a job, so I figured I was a good mother. I was a working person. I only partied on the weekends, and I cooked every day for my kids. Did the motherly thing, but the weekends was mine. Um, then one Sunday, and well, this is not just one Sunday. It was Easter Sunday, 1992. So me and my boyfriend at the time and the kids, because the kids was like, "Mom, are you gonna go to church? It's Easter. Are you gonna go to church?" And I was like, "Okay, well, I guess I can go to church with them on Easter." And so my boyfriend at the time, he decided to go too, and my youngest daughter, our daughter, was 3. So we go to the church, and it was a whole different experience. It was just so much power in the message. I was just fixated on every word that came out of that man's mouth. Um, he talked about the love of God. He talked about forgiveness and repentance. He talked about pain and burdens, and he talked about salvation. And I I knew it was a word, a message for me. I mean, it was so much power that day. And I didn't want to go down there. I mean, it wasn't a plan of mine to go to church and go get saved. But I remember when I was 15, I was going to church with one of my friends, and I only went as an excuse to get out the house because I got nothing out of that church. you know, we would go to church and then go outside behind the church and smoke pot. So she went to church. She was her parents, her aunt. She lived with her aunt. Was very religious, so they would go to church like 5 days out of the week, and she didn't like it. But this one Sunday, I went to her church when I was 15, and I was told you got to be saved. And okay, so I got saved. So I didn't know what that was. So I'm fast forwarding into my real day of salvation. Um, when I was about to get up to get saved, I heard a voice said, "You already saved. Remember you got saved when you was 15?" That was the devil trying to stop me from getting saved. And then I heard another voice said, "Just in case." And so I knew that was meant for me to go. I don't remember. We was like in the middle of the aisle. I don't remember, saying excuse me to get past people to get to the aisle to go down to the front. And I don't remember. I do not remember walking down the aisle. I felt like I was in a Spike Lee movie and I was being propelled to the front. And I got there and I said the sinner's prayer and I started bawling like a baby. I mean, I cried. I couldn't understand where the tears was coming from, why I was crying so hard and couldn't stop. And then they took me in the back to tell me what it was I did, what impact it would have on my life, and told me I'm now a child of God. And I come back to my seat, and my daughter, she was so young, she was like, "Mommy, what did they do to you?" And because she didn't understand the tears. And my two oldest was, elated, and they said, "We're gonna get a crown when we go to heaven. We're gonna get a crown because of us." you came to church and you got saved. And my ex, my boyfriend at the time, he was like, "Why are you embarrassing me?" So I didn't understand what was going on. But all I know was I couldn't wait to get back to church to have that power, to receive that power. And I did. I went back the following Sunday and there wasn't no power. It wasn't the same at all. And so I think that was my day for salvation. But I think it was some kind of something going on. At some point, they had this election, and they had this politician in the pulpit saying, "Vote for me." At some point, I just was not happy about it. I just wanted to feel that power again. And so, um, long story short, because the whole salvation thing and how I got to be where I'm at with the pastor I have now. Eventually, that previous pastor, moved on, and the pastor I have now became the pastor. And once he became pastor of the church, my life changed. It was the power every single week. Every word came out his mouth was anointed for me. I mean, then I during that time I got to know who Jesus was. You know, as a child, I think we may have heard something about a man on the cross, but we didn't understand it. Um, I remember, going to the church and still living in sin. And I remember being told that that relationship, God's going to sever that relationship and he's going to end that relationship. And it was something I needed. I just couldn't figure out how to end it and where I was going to go. But I remember being asked to teach the children. And I was only saved for like 6 months. So I'm like, I can't teach the kids. I can't teach the children's church and this was a new church. So they just needed anybody who's willing to work. Um, I said, I can't teach the children. I don't know anything about the Bible. And I was told, while you're learning, they're going to be learning. But so you got to search the Bible for the stories to teach the children. And I started reading these stories. I started at Genesis and started reading the stories. And so when I read about the flood, I was like, that's biblical because I think we all have heard about a flood. And then Jonah and the well, I just was shocked that that was biblical. And Noah's Ark, I don't know why I thought it was like a Mother Goose story or something. Because somewhere along the way, we hear these stories about the ark and the animals two by two and Jonah and the well and the flood. And so I would come. Now, at this time, I'm 30. I was 30 years old. So I wasn't like I was a teenager. And I would be so excited to tell the kids what I learned and say, guess what? And I'll tell them, they was like, yes, we know. Yes, we know. Because they heard those stories. But it was all new. I mean, I was a babe in Christ and God was doing something in me that was amazing. So, I started, becoming closer and closer in my relationship with God. I was just reading wherever I can read about God and his plan for my life. I heard that he had a plan for my life. And I'm like, what kind of plan do he have for me? Um, a girl who'd been raped so many times and teenage mother. I had a GED because I had dropped out of school to get married and went back and got a GED. I mean, why? No, I just couldn't understand how God can possibly have a plan that he can use me for his kingdom. And so at some point, I realized I had to leave that abusive relationship, and I did leave. And it was not physical abuse, but it was not a happy. I was not happy. So I ended up leaving, and with counseling from the pastors telling me this is what I need to do, and God's going to bless you and find a way for you to have your own and take care of your kids. And so during this time, I had went to a little sidewalk school while I was in that relationship. And it was like PTC Career Institute. It was a 10-month school, computer training school. And so I got some computer training. And I'm tell you how far back I'm going to go. They taught us Word Perfect and Lotus 1, 2, 3. So kids today don't even know what that is. They don't even know what Lotus is or Word Perfect. But anyway, so I got a little skills because I was tired working in the factory. I wanted some kind of office job. So I got some computer skills. I didn't think to go to college because I was always told I was stupid, dumb, and not college material. So it never dawned on me to go to college. I just figured I'd go to this little 10-month school. This is when I was still living with my boyfriend. And I was, I got honor roll there, graduated with honors. And when I was getting those straight A's, I was telling him about the straight A's. And he was like, well, it's not like it's college. It's an easy school. Everybody should be getting A's, but everybody wasn't getting A's. So, um, anyway, I graduated. I did get a job um, as a receptionist in the portrait studio, and then I ended up being a photographer for the portrait studio. That's another story. And so I was making good money. Then I became the manager of the portrait studio, and so I was making good money, and I left that relationship and ended up living with one of my siblings. And while I was there, I met somebody. I knew her already, but I ran into her and told her I was looking for a place to live. And so she was like, won't you buy a house instead of renting an apartment? And so she introduced me to a realtor. And long story short, I bought my first home. I mean, I stayed at my sister's house for 3 months. I used my income tax check, and I only had to use $1,200 for a down payment on a house. And it was just all God making a way. It was all God. I mean, I got first time home buyers grant, a seller assist, and it was just amazing. I bought a house. It was a big 5-bedroom house that was completely furnished. I mean, it had everything in it. Bedrooms was furnished, the kitchen, the dining room. The person who lived in the house didn't have any children. Her husband had died, and she was going to a nursing home, and she left everything. And in fact, I still got some of that furniture here. So I moved, I mean, pieces of it. There was a lot of antique furniture that she left. So I moved in that house in 1995. And meanwhile, just serving the Lord. I mean, I was in church every time the door was open. I was catching a bus. I didn't even have my license at the time. And then my pastors encouraged me to get my license. I eventually got my license and just serving the Lord, just finally getting some peace and some joy in my life. And I'm just going to back up just a little bit. In the 80s, while I was being abused, I wrote this poem about wanting to have this life that now I'm having. And so at some point, the person's going to edit my video. They want to ask them to insert the poem somewhere in there so you can see it. Because if I recite it, I might get emotional. But that poem became my prayer, and that prayer came true. So now I'm a single mother, living in my own home, serving God, working, and just living the life that God had for me. But it just started going up from there. So then, remember the guy I told you about, the divorcee with the 3 kids? Well, somehow he ran to my ex, and then my ex gave him my number, and then we end up, um, rekindling our friendship, and then we fell in love. So I'm married to him now. We started rekindling our friendship in 2000, and when we ran into each other, I'm like, I'm saved, and he said, I'm saved, and we both were saved and serving the Lord. And um, we dated for about 5 years. I was afraid to get married, but we went through marriage counseling. Every time we went to marriage counseling, I was like, I don't know. But eventually, we got married in 2005, and been going strong ever since. But let me just tell you how good God is. He has a person in your life. He has pastors for each and every one of us. He said he had given us pastors after his own heart to feed us with knowledge and understanding. And he blessed me with 2 pastors, a husband and wife team that helped me to grow to be the person I am today. You know, um, then he gave me a husband that loved me like Christ loved the church, who encouraged me. And he, convinced me to go to college. And I'm like, I'm not college material. And he said, says who? Well, I've been told I wasn't college material, and that was stupid and dumb. But to shut him up, I said, well, let me go and apply. And I started out at community college, and then um, ended up getting A's, and then switched over to another university, Gwinnett Mercy, and was getting straight A's. And then I got my bachelor's degree and graduated with one of those Latin honors, and was just so surprised that that was me. I just couldn't believe it. So I got my bachelor's degree. Then I just stayed and got my master's. And then years later, I went back and got my MBA, got a second master's degree. And this is a person that never thought that they were smart enough for college. The devil would use every trick in the book, and he would use people to hold you back from being who he created you to be. I'm going to backtrack a little bit to tell you how I came to want to help people where it comes to wellness and living their best life, and then I'll go into some other blessings from God. So when I was around 27, and this was before I got saved, I noticed I was getting nervous because I just had my last child, my third child, and I noticed women in their 30s were like obese and out of shape, and I was just like, ah, is that what 30 looked like? I just got fearful of that. So me and a few friends started working out together, doing Jane Fonda. So you know how far back that was. We had the Jane Fonda VHS tape, and we would do that, and we would meet up every day. And we started working out, and I just never stopped. They stopped. I would see them years later, and they was like, "You still work?" I just continued on. But once I got saved, it became a mission of mine to honor God with my body and to undo some of the damage that I've done with the drugs, the alcohol, the fornication, all the stuff that I did to my body. I just wanted to honor God in my body. And even when I wanted to fall off and do what everybody else was doing, the Holy Spirit will always speak to me and say, "You don't need that honey bun. You don't need that cake or that candy bar." And sometimes I would give in and do it anyway. But He always kept me on that track of wellness and health. All this information was coming to me about health and wellness all the time. I eventually did go to school to become a coach, wellness coach. But every conversation I have with people, a lot of the conversation, they would ask me questions about health and wellness. How are you able to do this? How are you able to do that? I gave up eating meat in 2006. Um, People would ask me questions all the time, and I was told that if you want to know what your purpose is, what is the main conversation that you have with people? What conversation do people want to have with you? When they call you, why are they calling you? You know, to ask you a question about what? And I realized that God was calling me to help people on this journey of wellness, health and wellness. So let me get back to how God continued to bless me. I got my two master's degrees. In 2010, um, my pastor, it's a husband and wife team. So the wife, we was having a women's service, and um, she was praying, and she came over to me and she said, "God said He has a house for you, a brand new house built from the ground up." And I was like, "Why?" I love my house. I loved my beautiful 5-bedroom home in Germantown. And she said, "God said He has a house for you built from the ground up." And that was 2010. And time went on, she kept reminding me about this house. And she said, "You don't want God's best." And so then I eventually got the kitchen remodeled in the house. And I had this beautiful kitchen built with these cherry cabinets, had double oven. It just had everything I wanted. And I called that kitchen my selfie room because it had all the recessed lights, and I would take all my pictures in that house, in that room, in the kitchen. And I started doing other work on the first floor. And the house had issues. I mean, the house was built in 1900, so of course it had issues. And I would tell Pastor, "Look, I got a new kitchen." And she said, "You just built somebody else's dream kitchen." She said, "God has a house for you. You don't want His best?" And she would say that. And but eventually the problems with the neighborhood and the house started turning my heart away from the home. So one day I'm in the kitchen thanking God. "Oh, God, thank you. I love this kitchen. I just love my kitchen." And I heard the Holy Spirit said, "This is only going to pacify you. It's not going to satisfy you." And I'm like, "Why would He say that?" And then I go upstairs and the roof is leaking. So that was the problems with the house started being magnified. And then the neighborhood, there were a lot of killings going on. So every other week, it was a new memorial on the corner of another person that got killed. And I would just, my whole spirit would drop as I'm coming down the street to go to my house, as I'm driving past all the poverty and the drug addicts and the prostitutes. And I just realized, you know, maybe God do have something else for me. So instead of going for the new house built from the ground up, which I didn't believe that was possible, we went looking for another home, not in Germantown, but in Mount Airy. And by now, the house was practically paid off. I mean, I had a 15-year mortgage, so I think it was paid off at this time. And so the guy at that mortgage company, when we was looking for a house in Mount Airy, he said I wasn't qualified. And he said, what I should do is sell my house because I have a lot of equity in it and pay off my debts. And I was like, the devil is a liar. I'm definitely not doing that. So, I'm trying to figure out how to get out of my house and still not considering what God was saying. And then one day at work, I was living in Philadelphia, but working in Montgomery County. I hear the Holy Spirit say, Google brand new homes in Montgomery County. And so I did. I Googled it. And then it came up, this developer. I hear, make an appointment. And I'm thinking like, these houses start off at over almost $500,000, me not thinking that I could afford it. And at this time, this is 2017. Now, she had said this in 2010. This is how long it took me to say, God, all right, let's see. Do you have a house for me for real? So I told my husband about the house, but I didn't tell him how much it cost because when we was looking, he said our budget is $300,000. So when he came to pick me up from my job to go see the model home, he saw the advertisement for the house when he went to the website to get the address. And he said, you know how much these houses start off at? And I told him we're only looking. And then we go to look, and I just fell in love with the dream house. It was absolutely gorgeous. And then the salesperson, she said, well, just fill out the application and let's see what the lender says. And 3 days later, the lender said, you got approved. And I had about $20 in my bank account. But anyway, I was just completely shocked. I said to my husband, we got approved for the house. And he said, and then the lender said, you need $52,000 for them to break ground, for them to even start. So I told my husband we were approved. And he said, approved for what? I said, the new house. He said, you sure? I said, yes, because they asked me, do I have $52,000? I did tell him I did not have $52,000. He said, are you going to get it? I said, I will. And he said, where? I was like, I don't know yet. But I will get the $52,000. And long story short, God showed us where the money was. I don't want to go into detail how we came up with the $52,000. And we are now, since 2017, living in a beautiful home with 3.5 acres of land that was given to us. And just walking out this plan that God had for my life. I just wanted to share my story today to help any woman out there who may be living in an abuse situation, maybe dealing with abuse or drug addiction, poverty, fear, who do not have a relationship with Jesus. I just want to tell you that your best life in Christ is waiting for you. Your best life in Christ is waiting for you. I also want to open up this YouTube channel for other women to come forward to share their story of pain and suffering, triumph and deliverance, of what God has done in their life. Come and let's share our testimonies to give hope to other women out there, younger women, older women who can't see a way out. There is a way out. There's always a way out with Jesus. My story and so many other stories is a testimony of the plan of God for our life and the power of God to deliver us from every situation. Right now, I'm living my best life, and this channel is dedicated to helping women to live their best life. And so I will be talking about wellness when it comes to fitness and nutrition, when it comes to mental wellness and, anything that will help you to be whole. And so God has given me this channel for that purpose, and I dedicate this channel to Him. Thank you so much for listening to me. I hope that my story will help, if not just one person. It will be all worth it. God bless.